Sarah lived in a quiet town in North Carolina, where mornings smelled of coffee and pine, and everyone knew everyone's name. She worked at a little bookstore on Main Street, the kind of place where time moved slower and hearts still believed in forever. One humid afternoon in June, a man in uniform walked in. He looked tired but kind, his posture straight, his eyes deep with something she couldn't name. He asked for a book on poetry, something he could carry when he deployed. His name was Daniel Reed, a soldier stationed nearby for training. She helped him find a small collection of poems by Robert Frost. When she handed it to him, their fingers brushed, and she felt a quiet spark that startled her. He smiled and said softly, "Maybe words can keep me company when bullets can't." He came back the next day, and the day after that. Sometimes he didn't even buy anything. He'd just lean on the counter and talk, about his hometown in Texas, about sunsets he missed, about how the world looked smaller when you wore a uniform. She told him about her dreams of writing children's books and how she'd never left North Carolina. They were opposites in every way. She was rooted, he was restless, yet they fit, like the ocean and the shore. By August, they were inseparable. He'd walk her home after work, their laughter echoing through the sleepy streets. One night, under the stars behind the old barn, he kissed her. It was gentle, unsure, like a promise he wasn't sure he deserved to make. But orders came. He had to deploy to the Middle East in 2 weeks. The night before he left, he took her to the lake outside town. Fireflies danced around them, and the world felt too small for how much they didn't want to say goodbye. "I don't know what'll happen," he whispered, holding her hand tightly. "But if I make it back, I'll find you. That's a promise." She pressed her hand against his heart and said, "Then I'll be right here." He left the next morning before sunrise. She stood on her porch and watched his truck disappear into the mist. Months passed. Letters came, folded pieces of paper covered in sand and longing. He wrote about the desert sunsets and how he still carried that poetry book. She wrote about the bookstore, the changing leaves, and how every quiet night felt too big without him. Then, one day, the letters stopped. Weeks turned into months. She checked the mailbox every morning, heart heavy with fear. News on TV blurred into white noise until she saw a headline about his unit being attacked. No names were released. She sat on her porch that night, clutching his last letter. "Don't worry, Sarah. I'll be home soon." Winter came, and she stopped expecting miracles. The bookstore felt colder, emptier. She still stacked poetry books on the front shelf, just in case he ever walked back through that door. Almost a year later, on a rainy March afternoon, she was locking up when she heard a voice behind her say, "You still have that book, don't you?" She froze, turned. Daniel stood there, thinner, a scar on his cheek, his eyes tired but alive. For a moment she couldn't move. Then she ran to him. The umbrella fell, rain soaked them both, but neither cared. He held her so tight it hurt. "I tried to get back sooner," he said, his voice cracking. "They told me I might not make it, but thinking of you, it kept me breathing." She cried into his shoulder, every fear dissolving in the rain. He stayed in town after that. The army offered him a teaching role, training recruits nearby, and he took it. Sarah's bookstore became their second home. Sometimes he'd sit by the window reading that same poetry book, his fingers tracing her name on the first page where she'd written, "Come home safe." Their love wasn't perfect. He had nightmares, she had fears, but they faced them together. Every morning, she'd make 2 cups of coffee and whisper, "You're home," just to remind herself it was real. 3 years later, he proposed in front of the lake where they'd said goodbye. He didn't kneel, he just took her hand and said, "You waited for me. Let me spend the rest of my life proving it was worth it." They married under the oak trees near the bookstore. Friends from town, fellow soldiers, and even a few strangers gathered to watch. When he kissed her, the whole crowd cheered. The world seemed brighter, louder, alive. After the ceremony, an old man who'd served beside Daniel handed Sarah a folded letter. "He wrote this before the mission," the man said quietly. She opened it later that night. The letter read, "If you're reading this, it means I made it back, or I didn't. Either way, you gave me something no war could take, a reason to fight, a reason to live. Don't ever think waiting was wasted time. It was love's test, and we passed. She folded it and kept it inside the poetry book, next to his promise. Years later, they had a daughter. Daniel named her Hope, because, he said, that's what brought him home. The bookstore grew busier, filled with laughter and new stories. Every now and then, a young soldier would wander in, looking tired and lost, and Daniel would hand him that same poetry book and say, "Here, words can keep you company when bullets can't." Sarah would watch from behind the counter, smiling, knowing their love had changed more than just their lives. It had changed the way others believed in forever. And when the sun set behind the trees, casting golden light through the bookstore window, she'd lean against Daniel's shoulder, whispering, "See, love really can survive anything." He'd kiss her forehead and reply, "Yeah, even war." In that small town in North Carolina, among shelves of stories and the soft hum of evening, their love became another tale, one that every heart in town knew by memory. Broken heart, because sometimes, the greatest battles aren't fought overseas. They're fought in the silence of waiting, and won by love that refuses to give up.